Hey everyone! Today we're visiting one of America's most overlooked historic battlefields, the Chalmette battlefield just outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. The story that played out on this site is one of how a few American heroes teamed up with a pirate wanted by the US government to yeet the British out of the United States once and for all in a battle that should never have happened in the first place. Stay tuned to find out more, and welcome back to my channel. If someone asked you who won the War of 1812, could you answer? Or would you just shrug and say, was there a War of 1812? If so, don't worry, you're not alone. Today we're going to walk the ground where one of the most famous and potentially unknown American victories ever took place, where thousands of British and American soldiers fought in less than an hour on January 8th, 1815. And here's the crazy part. The war had already ended. Sort of. As you walk around Chalmette today, it's hard to imagine this peaceful stretch of Louisiana countryside crammed between the Mississippi River and marshland, filled with smoke, cannon fire, and thousands of soldiers. Back in 1815, this wasn't a national park. It was a working sugar plantation belonging to the Chalmette family, and that plantation would become the stage for one of the most decisive and tragic battles in American history. The War of 1812 had been going on for over 2 years. The United States and Great Britain were back at each other's throats, fighting over trade restrictions, forced conscription of American sailors into the Royal Navy, and the British support of Native American resistance on the frontier. The U.S. officially declared war on Britain in June of 1812, and Britain responded. A successful campaign in the Gulf of Mexico, as argued by Vice Admiral Sir Alexander Inglis Cochrane, would demoralize the American spirit, hasten an end to the war, secure hold on a major port city, and potentially destabilize the land acquisitions of the Louisiana Purchase, as they refused to acknowledge any land deals made by Napoleon anyway. America, even as a young republic, was not having it. Neither side had really landed a knockout punch. In addition, the British Secretary of State for War in the Colonies, Henry Bathurst, was highly skeptical that American President James Madison would actually ratify any peace treaty, and in October of 1814 allegedly advised Pakenham, who would go on to be the leader of British forces at the Battle of New Orleans, to continue his military offensive there even if he heard rumors of peace, so as not to endanger his men in potentially hostile territory or miss an opportunity for victory. Peace discussions began in August of 1814, and 4 months later each nation's diplomats met in Belgium and signed the Treaty of Ghent on Christmas Eve. Problem solved. Except, nobody had email. Nobody had text messages. Nobody had group chat. The telecommunications we so readily take for granted were unimaginable. Crossing the Atlantic took weeks. Neither army amassing outside of New Orleans knew peace had already been negotiated. This is where General Andrew Jackson built his defenses. Instead of meeting the British in an open field fight, Jackson turned this canal into a heavily fortified earthwork lined with artillery. While most of what you see is reconstructed, parts of the original rampart can be spotted here and there. Behind these walls stood a surprisingly diverse force. Andrew Jackson, naval officer Daniel Todd Patterson, and the highly respected Choctaw chief Pushmataha headed the American forces. Regular U.S. Army troops, Louisiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee militia, free men of color, Choctaw warriors, Mississippi dragoons, and local volunteers were all in the ranks. Also was an unlikely hero, a pirate with a bounty on his head, who switched sides at the last minute to aid the Americans, proving to be a key component in securing victory over the British. But more on that later. All total, it came out to about 5,700 men, probably one of the most diverse armies ever assembled under the American flag during this period. Let's meet the British. And let's give credit where it's due. The British Army wasn't some disorganized mob charging across a field. These were veteran soldiers. Many had spent years fighting Napoleon across Europe. Some had fought at Salamanca, Vittoria, and even in the Peninsular Campaign. under the command of Major General Sir Edward Pakenham, and around 8,000 strong, they expected another victory, and rightfully so. There's a reason that, at its peak, the British Empire was the largest and most powerful in human history. Instead, they faced an exceptionally well-prepared defensive position. The British attack began before sunrise on January 8th of 1815. And almost immediately, things started going wrong. Units became separated, equipment failed to arrive on time, the ground was muddy, visibility was poor, and then they had to cross hundreds of yards of open ground while American artillery and rifle fire poured into them. For about 30 minutes, the battle became absolute chaos. Along the Rodriguez Canal, which stretched from swamp to river, Jackson had fortified his position with 4,698 on the left bank and 546 on the right bank. One of the key blunders by the British that contributed to their defeat was the lackadaisical dismissal by Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Mullins of ensuring the location of the fascines and ladders his troops would use to cross the ditch, scale the parapets, and surprise the American troops there. Repeatedly waving away the specific orders to do so by General Pakenham, when the orders to advance were given, a mad scramble ensued to locate those very fascines and ladders. This faux pas in locating the equipment proved catastrophic, leaving the advancing British open and vulnerable beneath a storm of American batteries, and with nowhere to flee between the river on one side and swamp on the other. Sir Samuel Gibbs, a veteran of the Napoleonic Wars and the second in command of British forces, was killed during this ill-fated advance. General Pakenham learned of this debacle, took the lead himself of the column, and likewise perished after catching 2 rounds of grape shot, the second inflicting fatal injuries. On the right bank, despite the British failing to secure the bank at night as originally intended, things were in reverse, at least temporarily. Incompetent militia deployment by American General David Bannister Morgan had granted the British a successful taking of the right bank, but they lacked the adequate number of men to hold it. Additionally, news of the left bank attack failure directed the British forces to withdraw and give up the ground they had fought so hard to take. Here's where we stop looking at uniforms and start thinking about the people, the inevitable cost of war. Young men, fathers, brothers, friends, many who had survived years of warfare in Europe only to lose their lives here. British casualties were devastating. Incompetence, poor communication, and the folly of a forward advance against an entrenched enemy had cost the crown. More than 2,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing-captured. In contrast, American losses were remarkably light by comparison, around 70 total casualties. The fortified ramparts had done their job, and done them well. Standing here today, it's difficult to appreciate just how violent this field had become in such a short amount of time, especially when it didn't need to happen in the first place. One thing I really appreciate about Chalmette is that it doesn't celebrate death. Instead, it preserves memory. Whether someone wore red or blue, every soldier believed he was serving his country. 2 centuries later, this battlefield reminds us not only of military success, but of the enormous human cost that comes with war. The Malice Beauregard House is also on site, though it was built 18 years after the battle and named for its last private owners. When I visited, it was closed off due to extensive termite damage and deterioration, but it still made for an incredibly haunting feature that captured the ghostly ambiance of the battlefield. Also included is the Chalmette National Cemetery. This was established during the Civil War and holds more than 14,000 graves of Americans from the War of 1812 to the Vietnam War. While most of the soldiers from the battle are not buried here, the cemetery later became the resting place for thousands from conflicts spanning generations. It's a reminder that military sacrifice didn't begin or end with the War of 1812. As promised, we're back to the pirate who helped save New Orleans, Jean Lafitte. In one of history's great ironies, the man the government had been trying to arrest only weeks before became one of the heroes credited with helping save New Orleans. Among the most fascinating figures connected to the Battle of New Orleans was the French privateer and smuggler Jean Lafitte. Depending on who you ask, Lafitte was either a ruthless pirate, a brilliant businessman operating outside of the law, or an unlikely patriot. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. During the early 1800s, Lafitte and his brother Pierre operated from Barataria Bay, a maze of marshes and islands southwest of New Orleans. Their settlement, simply known as Barataria, became one of the busiest smuggling operations in the Gulf of Mexico. Ships captured throughout the Caribbean quietly arrived in the bay carrying everything from spices and textiles to weapons and enslaved people. Goods that would have been heavily taxed or outright illegal found eager buyers in New Orleans. Spanish merchants, French traders, American businessmen, and even respected citizens often looked the other way if the price was right. Naturally, the United States government viewed Lafitte as a criminal. In September 1814, while American officials were actively trying to shut down Barataria, the British Royal Navy arrived with a remarkable proposal. They knew Lafitte controlled experienced sailors, swift vessels, and valuable local knowledge of Louisiana's waterways. British officers offered him money, land, and even a commission in the Royal Navy if he would help guide their invasion of New Orleans. Instead of accepting the offer, Lafitte did something no one expected. He secretly informed American authorities of the British plan and offered his own services to defend the city. At first, General Andrew Jackson didn't trust him. After all, Lafitte was still technically a wanted criminal. But Jackson was also practical enough to recognize talent when he saw it, and Lafitte's pirates knew every swamp, marsh, trail, and waterway between Barataria and New Orleans. Jackson needed every capable fighter and every critical resource he could find. Lafitte's men were far more than rough-and-tumble smugglers. Many had spent years operating cannons aboard armed vessels, making them some of the finest artillery crews available on the Gulf Coast. While many militia volunteers had little experience with heavy guns, the Baratarians fired cannons for a living. During the battle, they served batteries along Jackson's defensive line, helping deliver accurate and relentless artillery fire into the advancing British columns. After the battle, many of Lafitte's followers received presidential pardons in recognition of their service. Lafitte himself returned to life on the Gulf Coast, where fact and legend quickly became intertwined. Stories of hidden treasures, secret maps, and buried gold have followed his name for more than 2 centuries, ensuring that the Pirate of Barataria remains one of the most colorful figures in American history. Among that blur of fact and fiction rests Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop, a historic building at the corner of Bourbon Street and St. Philip Street in the French Quarter. Supposedly, the structure was a location used to conduct illegal dealings of the Lafitte brothers, but pinning down anything definitive to tie them to the building has been dubious at best. What else could be expected from criminals operating outside the law? The more realistic hypothesis is that this was most likely built as a house in the late 1700s, but it does remain one of the oldest surviving structures in New Orleans. It's currently operating as a small, cozy little bar with stone walls and a fireplace and outdoor seating for prime people watching. If you're visiting the Big Easy, make the trip to this quirky little historic site and pick up a famous New Orleans hurricane and a souvenir ball cap. And the next time someone tells you that a pirate helped win one of America's greatest military victories, you can confirm. I remember taking field trips to this battlefield as a kid, and like so many things lost to the folly of childhood or youth, I didn't appreciate it nearly as much at the time. Tucked just outside of one of America's most famous cities, millions visit New Orleans every year for the food, the music, and the French Quarter. But just a few miles away sits the place where the final major battle of the War of 1812 unfolded. If you ever find yourself in New Orleans and you're even remotely interested in history, I highly recommend spending a couple of hours here and follow it up with a trip to the quarter to round out that experience. If you enjoyed coming along, be sure to like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments if you've been here too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.